Business Spotlight, brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.
I'm Sonya Farrell and this is Business Spotlight in partnership with Cross Rhythms City Radio and Baba Baboon. Joining me in the studio this week, we've got Mike Taylor from Abacus Training. Abacus Training was first founded in 2002 and then in 2011 became Abacus Training Centre Limited. Mike, hello, how are you?
Hiya, I'm good, thanks. Are you, Sonya?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. The sun's been shining, Mike, so I'm okay.
Very much.
Well, thank you for coming into the studio here at Cross Rhythms. And now, Abacus Training. You do all sorts of different training related to first aid and, you're working with various different businesses within different industries, different sectors. But first of all, I just want to ask, Mike, why is first aid training, and it might sound like a simple question, but why is it really so vital in the workplace?
In fairly simple terms, first aid training keeps your employees safe. It helps company owners, managers show that they care about their staff. Mm-hmm. It reduces absences and it helps employees feel valued. And if something happens that needs a bit of first aid, then the first aiders can hopefully deal with it. If it is something quite small, minor, bumps, bruises, ice packs, sprains, a little burn, something like that, and they can recognise some of the more serious things, heart attacks, strokes, and they can give appropriate sort of management until the ambulance arrives to take over and deal with the casualty and take them to hospital.
And depending on the size of a business, does the training, does it differ? Does it matter on how many staff or in different sectors? Does it differ slightly at all? It
does, yeah. There is guidance from the HSE on their website, and for example, their advice for small businesses that have maybe half a dozen, maybe 10, 12 people working in a low risk environment, such as an office or a library or something along those lines. They would say that the one-day emergency first aid at work would most likely be suitable. Looking at sort of bigger businesses with a bit more high risk, so something like manufacturing or warehousing or working with chemicals, then it might be the 3-day first aid at work that goes into a bit more detail on some of the topics and covers more topics. There are other courses that are sometimes referred to as advanced first aid courses. They are things like FPOS, FROS, FREC. Different awarding bodies have different names for them, and they are 4 or 5 day courses. 4 or 5 day courses that go into more detail. They could be for people that work at heights, wind turbines, things like that. Close protection officers or bodyguards, as they are sometimes referred to, people working in higher risk environments, people who are remote from the emergency services, remote from medical assistance. And then you've got paediatric courses. They are normally 2-day courses, and that would be for things like nurseries, schools, anywhere that tends to work a lot with children, basically.
And you mentioned a few things there already. And another thing, first aid, when most people, I imagine, they think of first aid, they can get sort of an idea about what's involved and what it actually is. But it's something, there's a lot of talk now over the years about mental health in the workplace. Now, there is. What is the mental health first aid, and how does what's that process?
Yes, there are mental health first aid courses. There are 3 main ones. There's the level 1 sort of first aid for mental health that comes from many of the awarding bodies. There's a level 2 version and there's a level 3 version. So the level 1 is about 4 hours. The level 2 is a 1-day course, and then the level 3 is normally a 2-day course, and it just covers a bit more detail, goes on to some more of the topics on the sort of longer length courses.
What would somebody get from that? What sort of things would they learn from like a mental health first aid?
So some of the topics on the mental health first aid courses are recognising when your colleagues or people in your workplaces are not being themselves and trying to pick up on those little sort of things that they exhibit. They may be talking differently, behaving differently, be withdrawn, things like that. So part of the mental health first aid course is recognising those kind of things and covering topics such as stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, and things like that.
Well, so I wasn't aware myself of how much detail and how much goes into them sort of things, courses myself.
Yeah, it does go into quite a bit of detail with some of the courses.
And I'd imagine, quite in depth. But you touched on something, when we first started chatting as well, about how the first aid sort of training as well, how it can help with, whether it's staffing issues or, absences and the productivity within a workplace. And from your experience, you've been doing this now for a long time, many years. Can you think of any sort of examples that you've experienced or witnessed yourself where once you've got in and done this training, you've had feedback where people have said it has helped with that sort of productivity?
Yeah, quite a few different examples over the years. Some workplace-based, some family, friends, community-based kind of thing. We do get calls, messages, emails from people who've been on courses, whether it was that day or weeks, months ago, where they've had to use their first aid skills and they've got a good outcome. Sometimes it's not a good outcome, we've got to be honest, and that is something we always talk about on courses. No matter what you do, even if you do your absolute best, sometimes it's not a good outcome, and it is important to talk about that afterwards. But we've had people get in touch with us over the years. I think the fastest we've had was completing a 3-day first aid at work course at 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever it was, for the finish time for that particular group. And I got a phone call probably about an hour and a half later from one of the chaps that attended the course, and he'd had a knock on his door from next door neighbour to say that her partner had collapsed in the shed and she didn't think he was breathing. The chap who'd done the first aid course went straight round, realised that the casualty was not breathing. He shouted to his wife to get on the phone. She got on the phone to get the ambulance on the way, and the chap started CPR, and the casualty was breathing when the ambulance service arrived, which is quite unusual. CPR on its own does not often sort of get the casualty going, so to speak. It doesn't normally get them breathing again, doesn't normally get the heart going. It's normally the defib that does the big job, so to speak. But that was a really good outcome, and the casualty did survive. And I think that's probably the fastest sort of response I've had from somebody having done a course with us, that they've used their skills and got a really good outcome. Sometimes we get calls and emails from people who've done first aid on someone in the street, and they've sort of kept them comfortable, done what they could until the ambulance arrived. Sometimes we get it from workplaces. One particular client had a chemical splash to the eye, and the first aid given meant that employee kept their eyesight and they were back at work within a few weeks. Whereas if the first aider didn't react quickly and didn't use the product that was designed for absorbing chemicals in the eye, absorbing chemical splashes to the eye, the comments from hospital were this employee probably would not be able to see again.
Right.
So, yeah, some really positive outcomes there.
Yeah, and it's, by providing the training, again, helping whether it's a member of staff or, in the workplace. But then from what you've just said there, they not only help employees, but also people in the community as well.
Very much
now,
so.
Apart from that, the different, like we've talked about the different sort of sides of the training as well. And then the different sectors, every single workplace, or everybody, I suppose, should be looking into some sort of first aid from what you've mentioned there. But what about, people who work in maybe, the emergency services? How does that work? 'Cause I know you've got a bit of a background in that yourself as well.
Yeah.
How does it work differently for those sort of organisations?
So we do provide training for fire and rescue services. They go for courses that are normally above the first aid at work. So the FREC course or the FPOS course or the FROST course, one of those types of courses, the advanced first aid as it tended to be called in the past. And they will have additional skills that go above first aid. So a lot of the fire services, for example, they carry defibrillators, they carry oxygen, they carry airway devices, they carry tourniquets, pressure devices, chest seals. They carry a lot of additional equipment that goes above what's often referred to as standard first aid courses, because they are quite likely to deal with casualties that are quite badly injured, require additional skills, and they can provide those skills, use that equipment to stabilise the casualty whilst the ambulance is still on the way, or they can assist ambulance when ambulance are there, and that does go a long way to helping survival rates at sort of trauma type jobs and also medical type jobs that some fire services do attend.
And the training then, if somebody, a business or whoever, was doing the training, how often is it advised, or how often would they need to do sort of a training course to keep sort of refreshed and to keep everything there and keep policies happy?
Yeah, absolutely vital that training is refreshed. Most of the first aid type certificates are valid for 3 years, so they have to be redone, or a reassessment or a requalification type course has to be done within 3 years. There is also a recommendation from the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, that annual update training takes place for first aiders. So that is often a half-day course to cover things like the primary survey, which is checking it's safe, checking if your casualty is responding, that their airway's open, and checking if they're breathing. It would cover things like your CPR, your defib, your recovery position, bleeding, bandaging, and a few other topics, as well as if anything's changed protocol-wise in the last year or so, then that would be the ideal time to update people on those courses. Some other organisations have particular requirements, such as the General Dentistry Council requires dental practices to do CPR and defib training every year. They often also require dental staff and healthcare professionals that work in dentistry to cover certain drugs that dental practices have, know what they are, how to use them, when to use them, dosages, and that's normally an annual requirement. So some particular sectors have additional requirements that go above the HSE requirements. Schools typically need to do paediatric courses because they're dealing with children. Children can have different protocols for certain things, such as CPR and choking protocols for children and babies. There are slight differences than there would be for dealing with adults that are choking, for example. So Ofsted early years requirements have a stipulation that paediatric training is to take place within schools and nurseries. And there is then also the requirement that sort of adult type first aid courses take place as well, because the staff in the primary school and the nursery have got to look after the other staff as well. Yeah. So they've got to cover adults and children sometimes.
And a word that's been coming up while we've been chatting a lot here in the studio, Mike, is defibrillators.
Yeah.
Now, how sort of do you see it when you're going into different organisations? How much awareness is there out there now about defibrillators, because it's something, you know, I'll come across now and again, I'll hear topics, but it's not always in conversation when I speak to different people. I mean, what is, you know, from your own perspective, what awareness should there be and how much is there at the moment?
Okay, so in the past, defibrillators were not particularly common within workplaces. They weren't particularly common out in the community. People often didn't know what they were, or were very sort of apprehensive or scared to use them. They had seen things like Casualty, Holby, ER, the other typical dramas on the television, where they had seen defibrillators used with the sort of paddle style, and you often had to rub conductive jelly on and set the shock level themselves, as well as recognise the heart rhythms from the monitor. And people often had a massive misconception that that's what the public would need to do and what defibs in workplaces would be like, and that just is not the case anymore. Defibrillators nowadays are very straightforward to use. They have sticky pads that are stuck to the chest. You don't have to recognise rhythms. You don't have to put paddles on and all that kind of thing. You literally put the sticky pads onto the chest. The defibrillators that are out there within the communities and workplaces are referred to as AEDs. So that is automated or automatic external defibrillators. So they will look at the heart of the casualty, look at the rhythm. They will decide if a shock is required. They will set the shock level, and some of them deliver the shock completely automatically, and they will shout instructions. They will tell you to stand clear. Some of them are what are referred to as semi-automatic defibrillators. Okay. So they will do all the technical things. They will do all the analyse and set the shock level, and they just tell you to push the button that's flashing, and the rescuer pushes the flashing button kind of thing, and that delivers the shock. But they are very safe bits of kit. They will only shock if they need to. It is not what you typically see on the dramas on the TV in the past. With regard to awareness, in the past we tended to find workplaces were very apprehensive and didn't want defibrillators in the workplace. It is becoming better at the moment over recent years. More clients have got defibs in the workplace, or more places we go into for the first time have got defibrillators in the workplace, but it is not as common as it could be. Other sort of countries within Europe, within the world, defibrillators are more common in the workplace. They are more common in the community. It is getting better in the UK. You do tend to see more defibrillators in workplaces and in the community, typically in the yellow boxes that are commonly seen on the pub wall, the post office wall, the local sort of supermarket wall kind of thing, as well as church halls and village halls and that kind of thing. They are becoming more commonplace, but we still need more of them out there. We still need more awareness within the community of what a defibrillator actually is, and that anybody can use them. It is better if people have had training, because they know what to do, they know what's going to happen, they can be more efficient time-wise, whereas defibrillators can be used without any training or knowledge or experience. But I think people are often apprehensive to do that, because they just don't know what it is and what it does, and they've seen it on the TV, and they're often very worried about it. I have attended a few calls from my ambulance sort of role, where I've arrived to casualties that are not breathing, and there are people there are bystanders there, and they're not always doing anything because they haven't had any first aid training or any CPR training. They're not confident with what to do. And I have arrived to a couple of calls where people have fetched a defib from the local community, and they haven't put it on the casualty, they haven't switched it on or activated it because they were not aware of what to do, and they were possibly worried about doing it wrong, and you can't really do it wrong with an AED. They are designed to be publicly usable, and people can just follow the instructions. They just need to listen to what they're told. A lot of the defibs out there come with pictures on them that light up. Some have displays, so it gives it in words. They will often shout to you and have the visual. So if it is loud, you can still read the screens or look at the pictures, or there is a couple of them now that come with little animated clips to show you what to do. And they also shout at you, so if it's quite bright, it's quite a sunny day, you're outdoors and you can't see the screen properly because of the glare, you can still hear what's going on and what it's telling you to do. So they really are designed that anybody can use them without instructions.
Yeah, so from what you say, defibrillators now, they have changed, more simpler to use. Again, from your perspective, very vital as well, and important to have in the community, but also in a business as well. Just one last question on defibrillators. If there's a small business out there with, say, less than even 50 staff, or you've got a small office, or there's a larger business with like over 200, 300 staff, how many, if they're looking at defibrillators, get into their workplace, how many is there, a requirement, a number you would need depending on the amount of staff? Or the size of the office? Yeah,
it goes a little bit on size, really. The sort of statistics that are kind of mentioned out there from the Resuscitation Council and other sort of experts in the field, they say that if a defib is used within about 5 minutes of somebody collapsing, stopping breathing, going into cardiac arrest, if a defib is used within about 5 minutes, survival rate can be about 50%. Whereas if a defib isn't used within sort of initial 10 minutes, survival rates are very, very low, sort of less than 10% kind of thing. And if a defib is used within sort of 2 to 3 minutes, the survival rates can hit sort of 70%. Right. So it generally goes on the size of the business in sort of time to get to your defib rather than size of kind of number of employees kind of thing. So a lot of people do recommend that defibs are within about 2 minutes, and that gives you time to do your primary survey, recognise your casualty is not breathing. Person 1 would then start CPR. Person 2 would get on the phone, get ambulance on the way whilst going to fetch the defib. And then person 2 ideally needs to grab the defib that's within 2 minutes, and then they can get back to the casualty within 2 minutes, and hopefully they can have the defib on within about 5 minutes or less. And that's the kind of recommendations that are out there, that defibs should be within about 2 minutes of most people in the workplace. So if it is a reasonably small office with a dozen, 20, 35 people in there, etc., then probably one defib would cover that. If it's not a huge floor space, or there isn't multiple floors or lots of doors to get through, particularly sort of code lock doors or swipe doors that are going to slow you down. If it is a bigger workplace with a much sort of larger floor space or a larger footprint of building size, then that might be sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 defibrillators out there. Okay. And what I have noticed, just for kind of for public, a lot of theme parks now on their park maps, whether that is in the UK or other countries, they will show the defibs on the park maps. And they do have quite a few out there. Some theme parks do have lots and lots of defibs, and they will have them on the park maps. They will have them on their response teams with their first aiders or first responders. But it's really pushed that it's on the park map so the public know where they are as well.
Yeah. Mike, thank you so much for coming into the studio here on Business Spotlight. That's Mike Taylor from Abacus Training here on Business Spotlight with me, Sonya Farrell, in partnership with Cross Rhythm City Radio and Baba Baboon.
Business Spotlight, shining a light on our local business community. Brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.